We have a number of people dialed on from different locations. So just in relation to this session, this will be more relevant for the UK market. We do provide HR services across the globe, and we will be mixing up the webinars and having different consultants on over the coming months to pick up on different areas of, I suppose, importance in locations. I suppose in the Middle East, we're experiencing lots of queries around, you know, bringing people back into the office. We're experiencing lots of queries around redundancies and retrenchment, but also experiencing queries around, you know, if people are being made redundant as such and different rules apply over there. For example, how do they make sure that they have every avenue covered? In South Africa as well, we have a small team there. In Ireland, obviously, there's constant updates to employment legislation. But again, as I said, this session is just more relating to the UK market due to the huge raft of employment legislation that's either been, I suppose, announced or what will come over the next 2 years. So we have a mix of people on the call, as I said at the start, some SMEs and some clients that we work with, some people who partner with us, our own team obviously join for learning as well. And then we've got some probably very experienced HR professionals. So it's just important to remember that on this session, we try and keep it as kind of relatable as possible for people who are not from the HR industry, because we can get very much into the depth of these training sessions or educational updates in relation to flexible working or in any area of HR, because again, we do that for a living. I want to make it easy to understand for clients who are not from a HR background, but who manage teams. So there will be a little bit of a mix of maybe more basic information and then information where if you want to pick up on some of this, some of the points after the call, we do a complimentary call after this. So if you want to reach out, please do. And then what we can do is we can book a separate kind of a meeting with yourselves, break down any of the information further, and look at policies or procedures for your business. So again, this is a general update. So if some of it is a little bit more complex or some of it feels a little bit basic to you, it's just because we're trying to cater for a number of different people in the audience. Any questions? So I have Michaela who supports me this morning. She's our marketing manager, and she will be working away in the background because she's the techie person, thankfully. So any questions that you have, you know, please save them to the end. We will be opening up the chat at the end. You will be able to come on live and ask a question. If it's something that is more sensitive and you'd rather speak to us separately after the call and it's relating to a specific employee or a specific scenario, please, you know, feel free to reach out to myself or Michaela after this as well. So we'll be sharing our details. Okay, so in relation to myself, some of you may know me from LinkedIn or I suppose some of our social media posts. Some of you may have worked with me previously. I've seen a name or two on the list of attendees for today from back through the years, which is great to see. So I'm a HR director and worked in the corporate world for a number of years and ran big HR teams and worked in various industries, thankfully. So have gathered a huge range of experience over the years, and you almost have seen everything at this stage when you're 20 years or 25 years in human resources. I started Signature Associates 3.5 years ago, and we've been growing rapidly and work with a number of our own employees and then or associates all over the globe in those different areas. And we work with clients who are scaling their business, running big teams. It's varied from startup businesses to clients who are already very much established. So it's around how do we make their lives easier in terms of people and culture. We also have a finance department. So Fiona heads up our finance division. So again, where we offer out fractional HR directors and finance directors, we have the whole underneath layer of fractional HR departments and finance departments, and we will cover everything from bookkeeping and payroll and accountancy right through to cultural change projects. Learning and development is another big area. So we would have a number of off-the-shelf programs, but then we would have a number of bespoke management development programs that we would do. So it's a real mix of I suppose services that we provide. And as I said, if you're looking to inquire about any of these, please drop us a note after the call. So let's get cracking. So what is flexible working? You're probably seeing a lot about this if you're a client in the newspapers, in social media, LinkedIn updates. Why are people talking about it? What's changed? Who requests flexible working? What do you do if you have a flexible working request? What are the new rules? Well, are they particularly new? There's definitely some changes. But again, flexible working has been there. But again, the way you manage those flexible working requests, you need to be aware of the implications of not managing them correctly. Understanding discrimination, we might look at a couple of UK case studies. Hybrid working is coming back into discussions again, we notice, because, for example, we've had the fuel crisis, we've had the Middle Eastern regional conflicts, etc., which has then impacted people getting into offices and queuing for petrol, and fuel protests we've had in Ireland, and various challenges. It seems to have been kind of a difficult start to 2026 in some of these areas. So again, how do we keep refreshing our information, keep getting it out there so that employers are not stuck with how to face into different scenarios and what's reasonable when you're sitting to talk to staff about hybrid working. We will talk about productivity and culture in remote setups. Again, one of the challenges we see regularly with managers is, how do you manage a remote workforce when it's not something that you've been used to previously? You've been working in an office, maybe with staff within that region or kind of location, but then obviously, again, pre-COVID times, a lot of that has changed. So again, how do we then upskill managers to be able to manage teams remotely more effectively? And then obviously we'll talk a little bit about the Fair Work Agency. We'll talk a little bit about legal risks in general. So there's quite a bit there to cover. We are going to quickly, we usually do a poll in these sessions because we want to make sure that we are, I suppose, up to date with what people are experiencing out there. We usually have 10 questions that we go through on the screen, and it gives us an idea of what we focus our content on following the session, where people are stuck, where they want to have more information. Now, today we're going to go through 3 questions because we've got quite a lot of content the other side of the poll. So, Michaela, I'm going to hand over to you just to get that up and running for us. Michaela, you're starting that, yeah?
Yeah, the first poll is live.
Okay. I think I need to hide my camera to see that, I think. Okay, no, it's okay. I can't see it, Michaela, so I might just need you to just fly through the questions there.
Yeah, the first one was, do you currently have a written flexible working policy in place? And we've had 50% saying yes, 40% saying no, and 10% saying I'm currently dealing with one.
Okay, usually we can, that was the, usually you can see the poll, Michaela. I don't know if it's just me or can people see the poll? Usually you can obviously see all the...
They're seeing the poll. Yeah, I think it's because we're sharing screen, but that's fine.
Yeah, will I stop the share? Does that help?
Yeah, you can stop that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I'm going to launch the next one.
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah,
so for some reason I can't see those.
No problem. I'm just going to read it out. The next one is, in the last 12 months, have you received flexible working requests? And we've had 86% saying yes, 14% saying no, and then no one's said anything about currently working on them.
Okay. So in general, I suppose, Michaela, it's just, I'm not sure our poll screen is working like it usually works, but what I'm just going to do is fly back. In relation to the questions, I suppose it was the piece around, are you seeing an increase in flexible working requests coming through? How are you dealing with them? Or have you got current flexible working requests that you are potentially stuck on? You need some support, etc. So that's something we're going to go through in this. All responses obviously will remain confidential. So, Michaela, I'm not sure if it's opened up the voting, but we just need to test that again because I can't see the screen like we used to have on the previous one. But never mind. So we'll move on. In terms of flexible working, so the statutory right, new rules, the gender picture, discrimination, and live cases. So I suppose for some of you on the call who are not as close to the HR space in general, what is flexible working? So flexible working is any arrangement that differs from a standard working pattern. So when you hire your employees, you'll have them working on a standard working pattern, start time and finish time, over a certain amount of days in a certain location. Since April 2024, every employee has a legal right to request it from their very first day of employment, with 2 requests permitted per year. So what's very, very important here is, and you may see it as, well, how would I get one of these, Maria? In terms of what would usually happen is an employee will email you or they'll send you a letter with a flexible working request outlining their request for flexible working and the reasons for flexible working. Usually, again, it depends, they may not give you too much information at that stage. And then what will happen is you would go away and you would review that and you would book a flexible working hearing. So in terms of kind of types of flexible working, and there's probably way more than these, it's just a case of give you some general thoughts around it. In terms of if they're working a full-time role and they want to potentially move to part-time, that could be a request that they would make. It could be a reduction in hours. It could be spreading the hours differently over the week. It could be compressing hours into fewer days. So they could be working full-time over 5 days, but they want to do 4 longer days. It could be flexi time. It could be potentially more remote or home working. So there has been a bit of a change recently, hasn't there, where were kind of some of the bigger corporates that they were writing about in social media and in the papers and the news around bringing teams fully back into an office 5 days a week, which again is a big change to make following COVID, after people have now been used to having that bit of flexibility around home working, etc., dropping the kids off to school and so on. It can incorporate job sharing. It can incorporate term time working hours. Again, it really depends on the industry and the type of roles that someone may be working. So, for example, it's very, very important that you have your flexible working policy in place, because if you don't have your policy in place, the question then is how do you make sure that the employee understands how you manage your flexible working process? So, for example, similar to your investigation or your disciplinary or hearing process, what will happen is within that flexible working policy, which should be accessible in your handbook or within, your intranet, realistically, you should receive the flexible working request. And without delay, you should respond to the employee, inviting them to a flexible working hearing and making clear to them, the structure within that meeting, the right to a representative, any kind of information they want to bring with them, etc. And you would give them notice of that hearing, and you would hold that hearing, and that would be recorded, etc., and documented again like a normal hearing. But also you would then come away and you would review, what they've brought to the table and what you can accommodate. I suppose companies that are more used to dealing with it are more practiced, they're better at dealing with it. But again, you may have businesses that may be a little bit old-fashioned in their approach, and they're just not tolerating flexible working requests at all. But again, it has to be taken away and it has to be reasonably considered, because you may have some risk, which we'll cover later, that could leave you in hot water. In relation then to the flexible working request, you have a period of time where you will need to get back to employees. We'll cover those off in the slides coming up. But also there are a number of reasons and business reasons that you would need to consider around flexible working, and I suppose any kind of detriment on your business. And then you would issue a flexible working outcome, or you would meet back up with the person and deliver that outcome and talk it through further, instead of just sending a letter. And then you may set a review period, and then you'll have your review reminder in for maybe 3 months, and then you'll come back and you will then sit after your 3 months. If you're trialing something and if it works, fantastic, and you can approve it, you'll issue your paperwork for the longer term flexible working change, or else you will have discussions which will entail, information as to why that isn't working, and they may revert back to their normal working practices. So again, it's around understanding each step of the process. The biggest issue we see with flexible working is employers not understanding the steps, not having a policy. They just think it's a casual conversation. It's more informally agreed as a local agreement, and then that is where the issues start. They don't really understand the steps. So that's very, very important. So another, I suppose, piece here is the gender picture that we're talking about, because I suppose even from working within HR for years, realistically, your flexible working requests were generally coming from women potentially who are coming back from maternity leave, may have young kids. They were looking then to accommodate, you know, the school pickups, the drop-offs, younger kids in certain, you know, leaving schools at different times and so on. So that was really the more common theme around flexible working when I was kind of in more junior HR roles, but that obviously is changing quite a bit. So the gender picture with stats, trends, and the growing male shift, according to the CIPD, 70% of all flexible requests are made by women, which again is what I've been talking about. There has been a 30% increase in requests from men since 2020. So again, they're the fastest growing group. It's not unusual. You know, people are copping on to I suppose, the rights or the access they have to changing policies and legislation, which they might think, okay, well, maybe I would like some of that. So again, that's why you're seeing increased requests from men potentially. You may also have more men as the home parent. Who knows? It can be different in every household. 20%, 28% of men who want flexible working actually ask for it. So again, was it something that was overly common previously where you know, they thought it was acceptable to come and put a flexible working request in because, again, was it more associated with women? And 57% of men fear requesting flexible damage their career. Interesting as well. So that is definitely something that, you know, you may see in we would have a lot of kind of private conversations sometimes with employees in workplaces, and they will openly talk to you about things like that. And again, where they have a very solid, maybe high performing employee, maybe somebody who's a future successor for leadership team or board of directors or whatever role at that level, they are very conscious that putting in requests like this can be seen as a negative thing. Which again, if you're in a workplace that has culture and values that are promoting, you know, flexible working, etc., and they're openly communicating about that all the time, and they've got some great examples of how that works, that then is where that can benefit people maybe coming forward to have discussions about this more often. But again, just be mindful that you are seeing those changes. I did mention already, you know, caring responsibilities can be a big one. We are seeing more flexible working requests, coming in, even with people dealing with elderly parents at home or elderly parents in care facilities or care homes, where they are now then caring for their own family at home, younger kids, but they're also then at that middle age group, generation wise, where they may have caring responsibilities on both sides, which, as you know, can be very, very difficult sometimes because you're trying to spin all these different plates, work a full-time job and so on. It can be part-time return following maternity leave. Again, there are changes around employment legislation when it comes to maternity in general, maternity return, maternity in relation to redundancy, and performance management in relation to maternity coming up over the next year or two. So again, that's a whole other area and it's a whole other webinar. But it's just more so about being careful as to how you are supporting and managing returners from maternity leave. And also, you know, you do have certain companies that will restructure regularly. How do they then manage restructuring of potential maternity returners, and how are they making sure that they are considering all of the detail and all of the policy and the process they need to consider when managing maternity in general. You could have disability and health conditions disproportionately affecting women. Again, it varies. You're seeing a lot more now in the workplace in relation to disabilities. What kind of reasonable adjustments are you putting in place? The disability leading to those conversations, which then may lead to occupational health visits to make sure you've got the right medical information. But again, that can vary. It could be people having children at home with disabilities and so on. Lower pay often means flexible working is financially viable. Again, you know, some of these questions come up during the cost of living crisis over the last kind of 12 months, beginning of this year, where you have staff who are then experiencing increased fuel prices. And because of that, then their cost of getting to work is higher. So they're then approaching employers and having discussions about, well, the money I was earning is not viable anymore because of the increased cost of everything. And you're probably seeing all of that in the news every day. But again, how can you then put something into place without it damaging the services that you provide that is financially viable? Is there things you can do there around reasonable adjustments, whether it's around role, home working on certain days, reviewing salaries, who knows? Because it is a very, very different a very difficult environment now at the moment for employers in general. In terms of men increasingly requesting flexible working, you can see, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, shared parental leave, active co-parenting. it's more common sometimes for the woman to be out doing the full-time job and be the main breadwinner. Men at home raising children. Again, it varies from household to household. Mental health and work-life balance. This is a big one. We did mental health in relation to the workplace and supporting and putting provisions in place for your mental health strategy at the last webinar. And definitely it's an area that you need to be thinking about in your business and being proactive about it and what systems you're using and kind of what kind of, some companies have great apps and speak up apps and employee assistance programs and so on. But there is a bit of a generational shift where you're dealing with younger workers now, and Gen Z, you'll often hear them talked about, coming into the workplace with different expectations. So very, very different to when some of us on the call would be entering the workforce. But how then are we getting ready for that? Employers are saying to us sometimes, well, Maria, why can't we just have it the way it's always been? Sometimes I wish that was the case, but again, everything is changing all the time and it's evolving. So we as employers need to move with the times, because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. And Gen Z coming into the workplace now, I think it was Gartner that did the survey, so that 70 or 80% of Gen Z coming into the workplace are joining businesses that have a shared purpose with their own kind of values and their ways of working. So that's very, very important to think about. They want, their expectations are very, very different. They want the flexible working, they want the hybrid working. So yeah, there's lots to consider there. Dual income households where both partners need flexibility. Again, you're seeing cost of living increasing. That then means that you may have both parents working because they need to afford childcare, they need to be in work. They're obviously trying to manage careers as well as that. But again, that could be something where they're juggling the household pickup and childminding to then with jobs to be able to get by, because it's quite challenging, isn't it, at the moment, even with childcare costs. So male stigma is, sorry, I just see somebody coming up there with the question. I'll get to it later. Male stigma is reducing, but slowly, and legal risk remains. So treating requests from women or from men less favorably than women. So this is something that we probably wouldn't really have kind of mentioned before. We definitely would have seen previously the requests that were coming for women were usually coming after maternity leave to facilitate childcare. Again, you know, you need to be very, very careful as to how you deal with that, because the requests should be treated equally to a certain extent, and considering doing a flexible working hearing for employee A should be exactly the same as employee B. Obviously, they may have different situations going on, which you would need to consider. But again, it's about being transparent and being fair and consistent as to how you apply your policy in the business. Now, new flexible working rules. So from April 2024. So why are we talking about this in April 2026? So the new employment bill has landed. There's been lots of talk over this for the last year. There will be a lot more information coming over the next 2 years, and it's coming at different stages. So, for example, on the right-hand side, so I have a couple of things thrown in there of what they were initially talking about, and then what I will tell you about is what's actually come through and what's coming through on it. So they talked a lot about they were going to implement day one dismissal rights. So they were going to, previously you had to have 2 years of service to be able to take an employer to tribunal. What was being talked about was that they would be introducing day one rights, which would have been a massive, massive change for employers. Thankfully, they saw some kind of sense, and of course, it's going to be a very busy time for HR teams and HR consultants. So the day one unfair dismissal rights that is on this slide that we're talking about, it has been decided that it will be 6 months, and it will be 6 months starting from the 1st of January 2027. So what will happen is you will now need to tighten up on your probation periods. Your recruitment in general will need to be very structured, because you will have 6 months of a window to make sure that you're managing that piece effectively. Some companies that we're working with are changing to 3, 4, 5 month probation periods to give them that runway of the extra piece of time to extend or terminate a probation period. Again, we could almost do a webinar on that itself, which we will do later in the year. The what you will need to think about is anybody you're recruiting for at the moment that may be starting in June or July, for example, the 6 month cutoff, they will fall under that group of people, because realistically they will be hitting their 6 months by the 1st of January 2027. So again, it's a whole other webinar. They have been talking about 0 hours. We haven't had any more information on that just yet, because I'm sure there will be a huge impact on the hospitality industry. We have a lot of hospitality companies who operate solely on 0 hour contracts. So again, we were awaiting more information on that. There was a conversation around right to disconnect policies, which they have implemented in the likes of Ireland, France, etc. They have different work councils in France, different, the WRC in Ireland is obviously, there's certain areas in employment where they're way ahead of the UK, but right to disconnect policy exists. It was being discussed for the UK, but it hasn't gone into, they haven't done anything with it as yet. So we had some employers worrying about having to update that and having to put it into policies and how would they cope with that, because lots of employers use WhatsApps and Teams groups outside of hours. But again, it's not something to worry about at the moment. So again, with flexible working, some of this will repeat on what I've said earlier. You can have 2 requests per year. They don't have to have a 26-week qualifying period. They may apply twice in any 12-month period, regardless of the outcome. There is a deadline of a 2-month response, but again, I wouldn't want to be leaving somebody waiting 2 months to respond to a flexible working request or a flexible working hearing, because it's a long time. So again, you know, in your policies and with best practice, you should be addressing these as soon as you can, going away, investigating what you can do, coming back with some sort of a plan, and then obviously having that flexible working hearing. It's not just a case that you take away the letter and you decide what you do. You need to get into open consultation with the person, talking through the various ways they see it working and so on. In terms of the business impact, we'll cover off 8 of the reasons later that you will be considering, or you may refuse a flexible working request. But realistically, the employees no longer need to explain how the request affects the business. So again, you look at different areas, like, you know, what's the impact on service? What's the impact on the team across the board? What's the impact on who needs to be in the office because of lone working if somebody's working earlier shifts? So there's loads and loads of different things that you will consider. So as I said, you'll receive the request formally. So what I would really be careful of here is, you know, if somebody submits an email to you and it's a more informal, what feels like an informal complaint or informal request, what we will usually say to them is, okay, give them the policy and ask them. So some companies will have a flexible working request form. So in the flexible working request form, they will be brought through the different areas of information that they need, and they will submit that. And then obviously it's just be mindful that informal local agreements and informal conversations around this stuff will never do you any favors. It's about having that documentation. How many times do we say on these webinars, write it down, put it in your diary, put the diary reminder to go back and check, and so on. So acknowledging, it's acknowledging that request on time. So where they send out, often what we see is they'll send in the request, it'll sit in an email inbox, and the manager won't be bothered getting back to them because they've got 5,000 other things to do. Realistically, like anything else, like a grievance, anything like that, getting back to people as soon as possible. So we'd always advise within a day or two, working day or two, you know, if you're in the business, that you would respond and you would let them know what the next steps are. And you would also try and let them know as much as possible. And if you give them the copy of your policy, you will be letting them know what happens if it is approved and what happens if it's not approved. Holding the meeting, it's a legal requirement. Apply the same process to every request. Communicating the decision in writing. Saving the specific statutory grounds of declining. Again, you need to have a business case for declining something like that and the reasons as to why it's not going to work. Considering the business impact objectively. So is there going to be extra cost? Is there going to be 5 more flexible working requests next week once people know that you've approved flexible working requests for one of the staff members? Is it going to impact customer service? Again, it doesn't matter who's requesting. Of course, they will have different scenarios playing through in terms of why they're requesting it. But again, you need to be consistent as to how you apply the policy and taking each person's reasoning into account. Applying the 8 statutory grounds fairly, so I'm going to show you what they are, and offering the right of appeal. So if, for example, you go through a flexible working hearing, like a disciplinary or a grievance outcome, you will have a period of appeal. And then the flexible working hearing manager will pass that appeal hearing to somebody else, because again, it has to be an independent party at each stage reviewing that. It could be another member of your management team or so on. So again, they have the right to appeal, which is very important. So the 8 reasons or the 8 points I would consider if you were kind of working through a flexible working request in terms of, you know, what you might sit down and speak to an employee about. So for example, is it reasonable for them to request flexible working if it means it's additional cost on you? So again, if there are proposed changes too expensive or there is additional cost that you can't carry, you know, that's a reasonable discussion to have in terms of, you know, I would have to hire somebody else to cover those hours because of this flexible working request, which doesn't make sense sometimes. Detrimental effect and ability to meet customer demand. So if your client service is impacted, for example, you would not have to go through, or you would not have to, you know, approve flexible working requests on the basis that it's a detriment to your business. Inability to reorganize work amongst existing staff. If you don't have big teams, or you don't have other people who can support or adjust hours or take some of the work, again, you need to think about what's fair on those other staff members in that team as well. Inability to recruit additional staff. Again, we spoke about that burden of additional costs. If you, again, it's linked to that as well. If you can't recruit additional staff, or you can't hire somebody because they may say, okay, I want to reduce my hours by 2 hours a day, or I want to do longer days, so I only really want to have, I want to have a 3-day weekend. So you're not going to go and just recruit somebody to cover the Friday, for example. So that's something you need to consider. Detrimental impact on quality. So again, if it's work quality, there's a detrimental effect to, say you've got somebody in a role and they're a QC, quality checker, or they are a customer service representative, and it means that they won't be sitting on a phone, or they won't be getting checks done in their role. Again, any job could fall into that category. Detrimental impact on performance. So the change hurts company performance. Again, some of those will feel a little bit repetitive, because you might say to me, well, Maria, customer service performance and work quality is all the same thing. But it's about breaking it down and then going back to the staff member to let them know, you know, exactly what your thoughts are around the different areas, and giving them as much information as possible. Detrimental impact on performance, we've covered that. Insufficiency of work during the proposed period. So not enough work exists during requested hours. So very, very important that at the end of the day, if people are employed by a business, they're employed to do a job, a role. And the output and the execution of that role is within, you know, specific hours. If it is a case where the needs of the business most definitely will have to come first in these situations, but again, it's around what tribunals will look at is, have you really thought through other options or other ways of working this, and have you been reasonable around how you've approached it? Because if it's a downright no, I'm not considering anything, there is no other options, the employee may come to you with some proposals, a little bit like a redundancy consultation, for example, where their role may be at risk of redundancy, and they may propose to you other ways of working in those departments to save their role. Here, for example, they may come with proposals to you as to how they see it working. So that's particularly useful if you can sit down and kind of go through what their thinking is on that. Plan structural changes. You may have plans in the background to update structures, to downsize, to scale. Always there may be plans in the back areas or behind the scenes with management to change structures. They won't know that. You may not be able to talk about that as yet. But again, it's around how you are communicating, maybe not being able to give a flexible working request because of something that's coming down the line. So again, messaging is really, really important on that without giving away confidential information. But again, there are ways and means, you know, HR are really, really strong at that in terms of how to badge something, you know, if there's something that you can't particularly communicate to staff at this stage, but you want to make sure that they're in the loop around changes that are coming. So that's very important. Discriminatory risk, obviously you need to be careful in relation to discrimination around flexible working refusals. Again, we may see an increase in these because of the focus that's been on flexible working as part of the new employment legislation or employment legislation bill that's come since Labour have gone into government. So again, it's very, very important just to be aware of it. So indirect sex discrimination, for example. So where you may have policies or practice that applies equally to everyone, but disproportionately disadvantages women or men. For example, requiring all staff to work 5 days in an office disadvantages women with childcare more than men unless objectively justified. So there's a case here where they talk about childcare disparity between men and women. We do send out, so obviously these slides afterwards. Again, there are tons and tons of cases where you can go on and you can read about the cases themselves. where they will talk about, different examples of refusal of flexible working, even after return from maternity, found to be an indirect sex discrimination. And they'll talk a little bit around, father's request for compressed hours to share childcare is refused while mother's identical request is approved. So again, just being mindful of it. You may not always be thinking about these things, but just picking up the phone to your HR team, your internal HR manager, whoever you use, whether it's an external consultant or not. Again, a lot of how we work with clients is they will just pick up the phone as a sounding, as a kind of a sounding ground, or a let's have a chat about something, Maria. This is where my thoughts are. I just wanted to see if there's anything here that I should be concerned about or I should be aware of. That's really, really important in terms of, I suppose, coaching the teams that you're working with who may be dealing with this for a first time. You're trying to give them the tools to enable them to make decisions and enable them to learn as much as possible about people management and their policies. So again, it's about kind of working through different scenarios with them, asking various questions, making them think outside the box, and also trying to make sure that they get to a place where they can see how there is a place for flexible working within the workplace. So again, just some examples of kind of failure to consult before refusing is an important one. Again, there's tons of these online you can look up. Father's request refused, which we spoke a little bit about earlier. Mother's request approved. Disability and return from maternity leave, for example. Just to go to that one, employee with multiple sclerosis requested full home working on return from maternity. The employer applied a standard 3-day in-office hybrid policy without considering disability. The ruling was there was reasonable adjustment duty under the Equality Act, which overrides the blanket hybrid policy. So 2 legal duties engaged simultaneously. So again, where you may have a blanket policy for whether it's hybrid working, say hybrid working in your business, you may have scenarios where staff will raise that to you and they will say, well, you can't apply that to me because I have different needs. So how do you make the workplace accessible to them, and how do you accommodate disabilities, etc. Again, we mentioned already about, a father and a mother requesting flexible working requests, or flexible working in general, and the father being refused, but the mother not being refused. So again, how can we justify that? Applying different standards to men and women who are making equivalent requests is direct sex discrimination. So again, it's just really trying to educate your managers and trying to educate employers in general as to, there may be a lot more to this than just what you see, when you're sitting talking to an employee about a specific situation, thinking to them. So hybrid working then, i.e. your flexible working is coming in, they're making a request to potentially change working hours. Hybrid working, which you should all be fairly aware with, is a model where employees split time between home and office. So a big impact on recruitment for a number of years now, in terms of some employees will not want to do any roles except working remotely. So again, it has made, it has changed obviously the way the world recruits at the minute, and again pre-COVID, because you will have people who are very specific now about what they want and what suits them. And also they will only look for employers who will provide specific things that they are looking for. So it's an operational arrangement, not a statutory right. You choose whether to offer it and on what terms, i.e. you can have a hybrid working policy. You may have an employee who requests hybrid working, but again, you don't sit and go through a flexible working hearing or anything like that. It's a completely separate thing. There are companies that are proactively managing hybrid working very well, and it's almost about creating that culture of trust, and they are training their managers to manage their teams remotely, and it's part and parcel of their business, and it offers certainly some certain benefits. Then again, there are areas where it doesn't offer. There may be some teams who will say, well, this doesn't particularly work for our team because you may have people who are customer facing. So again, it's very, very important to understand the difference between flexible working and hybrid working. I think, again, it's back to industry has a huge part to play here, because if you're running construction sites, you're not going to have people at home working from home. You may have head office teams that are supporting those construction sites, or operational teams that are supporting them, but it's again around fairness between potentially site workers and office workers, and then how do you best consider what would work for your team. So that's a very, very important area. In terms of hybrid working and making sure that it is productive, i.e., again, like flexible working policies, you would be putting in place your hybrid working policies, defining eligibility. There may be a request process. It again depends on how you want to deal with this in your business, how you want to approach it. Some employers are very, they're very trusting of their teams. Don't forget, if you have the option of remote working, you may be getting access to a huge talent pool that you may not be able to get if you're just trying to get people into an office in one area. You can run trial periods, you can run review cycles. There's loads and loads of different ways of doing it. But again, it's around, I think the employers that are being very creative with this are getting on very, very well with making it work and making it fit, because it's what's happening. It's what's happened since COVID, and it's not going anywhere. Again, this the piece around training your managers as to, well, how do you manage performance from remote locations? Are you having your weekly check-ins? Are you having your team meetings? How do you connect with people like you used to connect when you were in an office? How are we measuring delivery and results? What different systems are people using to track productivity? Are you setting your KPIs? So again, that won't change. Are you having your performance reviews? Are you making sure that standards that are expected of hybrid employees are the same for, whether you've got people on site, you've got people at working from home? How are you being fair on standards that you're setting in terms of what they deliver? You may have teams at home and you regularly get the feedback that, well, I'm actually working a longer day from home because I log on now at 7 a.m. and I'm still at my desk at 6 p.m. Versus when they would be traveling into an office. So again, people will need to manage their own way of working to a certain extent, because you will have some very dedicated staff members who will be online at 7 a.m. But then there's the element of, well, how are you ensuring that, you've a duty of care to all staff? How are you ensuring that you are putting support mechanisms in place to make sure that you are not dealing then with burnout as such, because that's a huge topic for, it's probably never off the table. But again, well-being, mental health and burnout is very, very important when you start to think about hybrid working, home working. How do you support staff that are only working from home, who may not see people from Monday to Friday? Again, some people need that social connection. So it's as I said, it's a webinar in itself. Communication and availability standards, defining core hours. Are you offering flexibility around hybrid working? Do you accommodate different start and finish times? What are the standards for your meetings? Do you expect people to have their cameras on for Teams calls? Again, we see lots of employers who have different scenarios happening there, where you have full Teams calls with nobody with cameras on. Again, it's very, very varied. How can hybrid staff stay visible? Yeah, there's a lot to think about and a lot to discuss there. Health and safety is a huge part. So if you've got a full remote workforce and you've got people working from home, they don't have facilities from an office as you would have in an office. Are you then getting DSC assessments done? How are you making sure that, whether they're doing them themselves, you have a health and safety person that goes to their home? Again, health and safety companies in general are experienced in this area. But again, it's about making recommendations to remote workforces and putting in that health and safety aspect for remote workers or hybrid workers to ensure that you are ticking every box. So there's a huge amount of responsibility on employers with all of these areas. But again, if you've health and safety across your business, they will be able to assist you with that. Again, with flexible working or hybrid working, where you're trialing anything, again, regular 3-month reviews, assessment periods, appeal processes, all of the different steps that you can put in place to protect you and provide you with a safety net are there. Boosting productivity, which we've talked about now. There is, I suppose AI is a big one here, in terms of you've got different types of note takers, you've got different types of tools that will assist people, whether it's, ChatGPT, Claude AI, Fixer AI, again, down to volume of work. What kind of tools do we have to ensure that we're being as efficient as possible with remote working? Have we got, you see a lot of companies putting in different communication tools through their HR systems, speak up apps, all of that sort of stuff. They're doing more regular staff surveys because, again, they maybe feel more disconnected if their teams are working remotely. Again, you know, there's the positive aspect of it in terms of, you know, we spoke about opening up your talent pool. How do you celebrate hybrid wins? Are you still doing, you know, team events, toolbox talks, town halls? You are seeing companies that have really developed fantastic ways of doing things in relation to still being able to do those through a webinar, but again, are thinking so creatively about how they do them. Again, right to disconnect policy isn't something that we are concerned about as part of this employment bill. However, again, it may be something that comes down the line. So again, we have a lot of businesses who manage communications through WhatsApp. If you have a business WhatsApp and your staff have work phones, fantastic. If you don't, and if they're on a Teams chat, realistically, then they're managing that through a work laptop, which is through work time. Again, there's two-way communication channels. How are you doing it in your organization? We've moved away from the suggestion box in the canteen years ago, which you'd often still see people talking about. But also that there needs to be thoughts gone into, you know, are there confidential ways of staff reporting things to you moving forward? And how do you then ensure that from a GDPR and from a data safety point of view and from a confidentiality point of view, that anything like this is properly being implemented, but also where you're dealing with flexible working requests or hybrid working requests, again, like anything else, it's the same as a return to work interview. That information is being locked away, it's been securely stored and not being left around desks and being shared on screens or within emails and so on. Okay, in terms of case studies then around adapting hybrid culture, so the businesses that are really succeeding with this are the businesses that are kind of adapting and taking this on board. Here we have, for example, say financial services, an example of an SME with 250 staff. They had noticed a surge in working from home requests post-pandemic with no policy. Requests from women with childcare approved, men requests informally discouraged. Again, we talked a little bit about levels and promotion and career planning, and can it be seen as a negative thing? So they introduced a tiered hybrid policy with standardized approval for all, removing informal managerial discretion. But again, you know, you need to put your steps in place of how that works, how is it impacting your business and so on. So they noticed obviously reduction in attrition. They avoided potential discrimination claims, etc. Now, again, this for say clients on the call who don't get into detail with some of this, this is where we would work alongside you and talk you through, you know, potential danger in, I suppose, when people will come to you and they'll talk about victimization, they'll talk to you about discrimination, they'll talk to you about, you know, appeal processes, tribunal activity and so on. So very, very important that, you know, you're referring to your employment lawyer or your HR professional with this kind of scenario. Now, I'm just conscious of time. So Fair Work Agency, very, very important. You're hearing a lot more about this. It's a new UK government enforcement body launched in April 26 under the Employment Rights Act. It's designed to consolidate and strengthen the enforcement of employment rights, and it acts as a central hub to inspect workplaces, enforce minimum wage, holiday pay, tackle labour exploitation, and acting on behalf of workers and clamping down on rogue employers. So very, very important. These can arrive anytime. Like we often say to employers, you know, about right to work processes, especially in hospitality environments where you have kitchens full of chefs from different nationalities. They are obviously hot areas in terms of, you know, diversity. You will have some employers who will have people without the correct right to work, and the fine, I think at this stage, is £50,000 per employee. Hopefully I have that correct. But walking into restaurants and hotels, checking right to works at any stage, they can arrive obviously and check all of that. So you should have all of that up to date. But in terms of the Fair Work Agency, slightly different, auditing your pay records, auditing holiday pay. You obviously need to have a system where you are tracking all of that. So very, very important to be aware of them. Be aware that they can issue the civil penalty notices for national minimum wage, holiday pay, and if you're using an external accountant or a payroll company, a lot of those teams will be very, very good, obviously from the 1st of April, which they will have actioned already, in informing you of increases in national minimum wage, and they will be reviewing your pay rates across your business alongside maybe your internal HR team or your HR consultant. So they will have probably actioned all that 1st of April, I would hope. But again, your accountant and your payroll providers usually will help you with all of this as well. So very, very important that you're aware of the Fair Work Agency. So what can go wrong and how to stay protected? We've talked already about unfair dismissal. So about the 1st of January 2026, I'm just going to cover off the important points here. 6 months, they will have rights to claim unfair dismissal from 6 months. So again, probation periods are being reviewed in certain companies. Recruitment processes are being reviewed, and probation review structure is being reviewed. Sexual discrimination, be mindful of it in any case, but be mindful of it as well in terms of flexible working. Failure to adjust, i.e. reasonable adjustments, and we did speak about these in the last 2 webinars that we covered when we covered off DE&I, so diversity, equality, inclusion. How do you make sure that you're considering reasonable adjustments? What can you accommodate in the business? Are you relying on occupational health reports to help you with that? Have you got an expert who's advising you on it? And how to make sure that you're reviewing everything correctly. Constructive dismissal. So constructive dismissal is where, for example, somebody resigns and they say to you, I had no other choice but to resign because of what I'm experiencing in the workplace, or because of you refusing my flexible working request, or there's multiple areas that this can come into play. Breach of contract, for example, where their contract sets out their working days, their terms and conditions of employment, their hours, etc. And where you're not following flexible working rights or notice requirements, that can be an issue. Data protection breach, again, we've got a very, very good GDPR consultant who works with us on this, and this is something we are absolutely seeing an increase in. We did speak about it, the impact of AI on employee relations over previous webinars as well, because what you're seeing is with the use of AI, employees are better equipped to then put a case forward. And of course, data protection and subject access requests as part of that is something we're seeing more of, because as they will submit some of those requests, again, the employer is then nominating an IT consultant or using their internal IT function to go and do all of that work. So be familiar with the subject access request, but also be very, very careful, as always, with your GDPR set up within your organization and your data protection in relation to any type of staff records. Victimization, again, treating employees unfairly after they've raised a flexible working request or, for example, a grievance. Being aware of the definition of victimization, how it can apply, etc. And then Fair Work Agency enforcement, which is what we've spoken about. Failure to evidence decisions. So again, like everything, I'd be a millionaire at this stage, and loads of HR people say the same phrase sometimes out and about when I'm talking to them. If I had £1 for every time I've said to somebody, please write it down, I would definitely be sitting on the beach in the Maldives at this stage. So very, very important with your line managers, training them to get it down on paper, send the follow-up email, make sure they've got it in their action plan, make sure they're setting their reminders in their diaries and so on. Okay, so Michaela, we're going to open up the floor for Q&A, if okay, please. So I've got some very useful comments coming through here. Muriel, thanks so much for getting involved. And I can see what you're dealing with at the moment, which is, yeah, definitely not easy. SMEs with 80% of the female team already working reduced. Okay. Muriel, it might be worth us having a separate conversation about that. I'd be interested to hear all about it. But definitely, you know, can be challenged. It can be challenging. HR teams are experiencing a huge increase in some of this stuff. So, yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can look at some of the private stuff coming through. Perfect. Now, so I might pick up Muriel's one separately, Michaela. I'm not sure if that's in the public chat. It looks like it's in the private chat. So I'm just going to open this up for Muriel. Bear with me a second. SMEs with 80% of female team already working reduced hours. Okay, I want to refuse in a defensible way. Yeah, okay, nothing from anybody else. Okay, does anybody have any questions in general? Any comments, any questions? Feel free to pop up your hand and Michaela will open up the mic. Would love to hear if you're dealing with any scenarios like this at the minute. If you're not, wanting to discuss them openly online, obviously because they may be more sensitive, more than happy for you to ping us a note. My email address is marialawless@signatureassociates.co.uk. And again, that will be on the slides that we will be sharing. So I'm just going to give it another minute or two. There's some more chats coming through. Okay. One or two looking to pick up privately. Okay. I don't seem to have any questions coming through, but as I said, there's a couple coming through privately. If anybody would like to connect for a one-to-one, even if it's on a networking point of view, or you'd like to connect in general just for a catch-up in the chat, please do drop me a note. I will leave it there, Michaela. We will be sending out the slides. I think the recording also goes out in Michaela's email, I'm sure. I could be wrong there. But again, if anybody has any questions, please ping them through to us. Have a great rest of the day. I will be staying on for a minute or two if anybody wants to stay on and ask any questions separately